Hello everyone and welcome back to the 6th episode of the Game Mind and Sociology podcast. I know it's been a while since the last episode. May was an intense month full of final exams and graduation stress, so I really couldn't record anything, but now it's official, I'm a sociology graduate. Honestly, finishing university is such a strange feeling. I don't know, you spend years learning about society, people, systems, ideologies, and suddenly you're expected to go out and function in the very structures you've been analyzing. So, today's episode is inspired by this exact moment, this transition, this uncertainty. I want to take a step back and reflect on what kind of world we're graduating into. Are we still living in a world shaped by modern ideals such as reason, progress, and structure? Or have we entered a more postmodern era where truth feels fragmented, meaning is questioned, and nothing seems fixed anymore? So let's dive into the complex relationship between modernism, postmodernism, and how these ideas still shape our everyday lives through a sociological lens. So first, let me ask you a question. Do you believe in one ultimate truth, or do you think everything is open to interpretation? Let's start with modernism. So, modernism is more than just an art or architecture style for sure. It's a way of thinking, a belief that if we use science, logic, and reason, we can make the world better. This idea started during the Enlightenment, a time when people began to trust science and human reason instead of just religion or tradition. And the goal? So, it's progress, truth, a better future for everyone. And people believed that technology and knowledge could solve social problems, that we could plan and build better cities, better systems, even better people. And it was all about control, structure, and improvement. Now, in sociology, this way of thinking gave birth to the first big thinkers. So we mentioned them before. They were Auguste Comte, Emil Durkheim, and Karl Marx. So as we know, Comte wanted to study society like we study chemistry or physics, and he believed we could design a perfect social system using science. And Durkheim thought that society works like a body, with different parts playing different roles. So we can add here persons too. And he talked about things like social order. And then there's Karl Marx, who looked at modern society and said, wait a minute, this progress you're talking about, who is it helping? He saw the problems in inequality, exploitation, and capitalism. But even he believed that society could change for the better through revolution. At the heart of modernism are what we call grand narratives or big stories. And these are ideas like history is moving forward, science will save us, freedom and equality are coming. So modernism loves planning, organizing and building systems, and everything should have a purpose. Everything should improve over time. But here's the problem. Modernism often forgets that people are not always logical and we're emotional, complicated, and we don't always follow the plan. So, yes, modernism gave us useful tools, but it also made some big assumptions. That truth is always clear, that progress always moves forward, that reason is enough to solve every problem. And when these ideas start to break down, when we start to question science, truth, and progress, that's when we step into the world of postmodernism. So, coming up next, what if there is no single truth? What if everything is up for debate? So earlier we talked about how modernism was all about reason, progress, and making the world better. But here's a question. What if all that progress didn't actually lead to freedom for everyone? That's exactly what a group of thinkers in 1920s Germany started asking. They're known as the Frankfurt School, not because they were in a school building or anything, but because they were connected to the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt. Some names you might hear a lot of are Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and later on Herbert Marcuse. So these people were influenced by Marx, yes, but they weren't just talking about class struggle. They were trying to understand something deeper. Why do modern societies, which are supposed to be more rational and developed, still produce things like oppression, control, and even fascism? One of their main ideas come from a book called Dialectic of Enlightenment, written by Adorno and Horkheimer. In it, they argue something pretty surprising, that reason itself, the thing modernity celebrates the most, can actually turn into a tool of domination. Their thinking was shaped by that they saw in Nazi Germany, a country full of science, industry, organization, yet it gave rise to one of the most horrific regimes in history. So they started to question the idea that modernity always equals progress. Another major idea from them is the culture industry. Basically, they believed that popular culture, like movies, music, advertising, had become a kind of machine. It produces entertainment, yes, but it also shapes how we think, what we care about, and what we don't question. It keeps people distracted, passive, and okay with the statues. And it's instead of challenging the system, we're just watching TV, scrolling and shopping. And we might think we're choosing freely, but they argued, are we really? Or our choice is shaped by systems that want to keep us consuming and not thinking too much. Marcuse, another member of the Frankfurt School, took this further. He talked about the idea of the one-dimensional man, someone who lives in a society that seems free on the surface, but doesn't really allow for deep, radical change. Everything feels fine, but the possibilities for real transformation are kind of shut down. To be clear, the Frankfurt School didn't say modernity is all bad, but they wanted to highlight its contradictions, and especially the ways modern systems can quietly control people, not just through violence, but through culture, media, and rational organization. And honestly, a lot of the ideas still feel relevant today, maybe even more now in the digital age. So, what about postmodernism? A world of broken meanings and constant doubt. Now let's move forward in time to the 1960s and after. This is when postmodernism starts to grow as a response to modernist ideas. If modernism believed in progress, truth, and grand theories, postmodernism says, hold on, is there really just one truth? And who decides what counts as truth anyway? So postmodern thinkers started to question everything modernity had taken for granted. Not just science or reason, but also identity, history, even reality itself. One of the main ideas in postmodernism is that meaning is not fixed. It changes depending on context, culture, power, and perspective. So let's talk about some key figures. So Lyotard, he famously described postmodernism as a loss of faith in grand narratives. What does that mean? Well, in modernity, we had big stories like the idea that science will save us, or that history naturally moves toward progress, or that reason leads to freedom. And he said, these stories no longer work for many people. But why? Because they feel too simple and too universal. People began to realize that this truth didn't include everyone's experience, especially those at the margins. And Michel Foucault focused a lot on power, but not power like kings and governments. He looked at how power works in everyday life, in schools, hospitals, science, and even language. He said that knowledge and power are always connected. The people who get to say what is normal, true, or scientific, they're also the ones with power. And instead of just looking at big structures like capitalism or the state, he asked us to notice the small, invisible systems of control that shape our lives, what he called micropowers. In short, postmodernism doesn't give us easy answers. It invites us to be more critical and more aware of the systems around us, even when those systems feel invisible. So think about reality TV or even just, social media. Are people being authentic, or are they performing a version of themselves for likes and, for views? Or are we living in reality or in a simulation made of content and algorithms? So postmodernism doesn't tell you what to believe. It just asks you to look twice, to question what seems natural, and to accept that sometimes there isn't just one truth, but many depending on who is speaking. So now that we've looked at both modernism and postmodernism, let's talk about the tension between them, because they really represent two very different ways of understanding the world. So modernism is all about progress and the search for meaning. It believes in big ideas, like, as we said, one true story or one real identity and a clear path forward. And modernists think, if we keep using reason and science, we can build a better, more ordered world. On the other hand, postmodernism challenges all of that. Instead of one fixed meaning, it says meaning is broken up and multiple. Instead of one true identity, it sees identities as changing and flexible. And instead of one truth, there are many different realities, depending on perspective. So here's a big tension. Modernism tries to create order, a system where everything fits together nicely. And postmodernism comes along and says, wait, maybe that order is too simple. Maybe it ignores the messy, complicated reality of people's lives. For example, identity example, Think about social media again. Modernism would say you have one true self, as we mentioned it before, but postmodernism would say that your identity changes depending on context, mood, audience, or even the platform. So your Instagram self might be different from your TikTok self or your LinkedIn profile, but there is no one real you, but many versions of you, all real in their own way. So, modernism wants one truth, like a universal scientific fact or historical story, but what's true for one person might not be true for another. For example, think about news and information today. Different groups see the same event but understand it completely differently, and all believe their version is real. So I want to talk about Bauman, who talks about something called ambivalence. So he tries to explain the complicated relationship between modernism and postmodernism. So modernism is often seen as a time of progress, order and reason, but Bauman points out that modern life is not so simple. It brings both a desire for control and order and a feeling of uncertainty and constant change. According to Bauman, people in modern society feel two opposite things at the same time: the need to feel safe and stable, and the desire for freedom and change. And this creates what he calls ambivalence, when someone feels many fixed emotions at once, like belonging and not belonging, hope and fear, control and confusion. And he also uses the idea of liquid modernity to describe how today's world is always changing and nothing stays fixed for long. People have to keep changing who they are and how they live, which can be both exciting and stressful. So this ambivalence shows the tension between modernism's wish for clear order and postmodernism's acceptance of many different changing realities. And he sees these two ideas not as totally opposite, but as connected, because people live between wanting stability and having to accept constant change. And this creates a complex, sometimes confusing experience. So this is exactly the kind of tension Bauman talks about with ambivalence, feeling both freedom and uncertainty at the same time. It's like standing at a crossroads, but the signs keep changing, So what do you think? Is following trends a way to be free, or does it make us lose our way? So to finish up, we can say that living with trends instead of fixed ideas shows us something very important about today's world. It gives us freedom, yes, but it also brings confusion and questions about who we really are. This idea of feeling both free and lost at the same time is what Bauman calls ambivalence, and it's normal to feel this way in a fast-changing world. And I want to think about this again. Do you feel more free following new trends, or do you sometimes feel like you're just, I don't know, you're just going wherever the mind blows? So try to notice this in your own life and around you. How do the people you know deal with this, or what do you think it means for the future? Okay, so thanks for listening. I hope this episode made you curious and gave you something to think about. And next week, we're going to explore a very interesting topic: how cultural identity changes in our globalized world. We'll look at how globalization mixes cultures, challenges traditions, and shapes who we are. And I think it's a really important subject, especially after today's discussion about identity and change. So don't miss it. And thanks so much for listening again. And if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out, and see you next week.